Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. Franklin Pierce, our 14th president, Democrats, single term, is not a name and not an individual that you often think about when it comes to the Civil War. And yet, he had what I would think of as sort of a cameo appearance early on. During that period from late 1860, after the election of Lincoln as president, until just after Fort Sumter, that small period of months. I want to tell you a little bit about his maybe rise and fall during that period. So let me take you back to the presidential election. Lincoln wins in November of 1860. A minority of votes, 39.8% of the popular vote. Of course, there's a secession of South Carolina in December, and at that point, there's little hope to save the Union. This is where Franklin Pierce begins his slight rise, a slight reentrance into the public stage, if you will. There are folks at this time who are grasping at straws, looking for anyone and any bit of writing to help make the case to hold the Union together, as improbable as it may seem in December of 1860 and January of 1861. The Washington Constitution, which is a newspaper, publishes a rather long letter written by Pierce to a friend, and it's dated late November of 1860, between the election and the secession of South Carolina. I'm not going to read it all to you, but let me give you this excerpt, which gives you just a little bit of information. You can imagine anyone hanging their hats on this hope. And keep in mind, Franklin Pierce, the Democrat, is sympathetic to the Southern cause. And here's what he has to say. A quote, "I trust the South will make a large draft on their devotion to the Union and be guided by the wise moderation which the exigency of the time so urgently calls for. Can it be that this flag, with all the stars in their places, is no longer to float at home, abroad, and always as an emblem of our united power, our common freedom, and unchallenged security? Can it be that is to go down in darkness, if not in blood, before we have completed a single century of our independent national existence?" I agree with you that madness has ruled the hour in pushing forward a line of aggressions upon the South, but I will not despair of returning reason and of a reawakened sense of constitutional right. So there he is, Franklin Pierce, telling it like it is, giving his opinion, and people hang their hats on that. Meanwhile, he's making speeches in support of the Constitution. He's making speeches in support of the flag, and he's making speeches in support of sustaining the Lincoln government. Even though he doesn't agree, he's making speeches in support of Lincoln and maybe giving that government a chance. Meanwhile, Fort Sumter happens. The whole thing shatters even further, and the very idea of war creeping in is really driving folks to the end of their rope, any chance to salvage the Union. And Franklin Pierce is being lumped into a group with all the ex-presidents to save the day. In early May of 1861, weeks after Fort Sumter, this story appears around or in newspapers around the country. It's headlined "A Convocation of Ex-Presidents, Arbitration." That's the headline. Here's a little bit more of the story. Quote, "There is a rumor afloat that our several ex-presidents, to wit, Martin Van Buren, John Tyler, Franklin Pierce, Millard Fillmore, and James Buchanan, are to be invited to act as mediators between the government of the United States and the traitors now resisting and endeavoring to subvert its authority. As every one of these five gentlemen opposed the election of President Lincoln, they were also hostile to the principle of the election, but still were looking to them to help bring the Union back together. That's the end quote. So there you've got folks grasping at straws, helping, hoping that Franklin Pierce and the other presidents can come in and save the day. But it's really way too little, too late. While this newspaper and other newspapers are hoping for this convocation, it's just a rumor. Too much has gone by. Fort Sumter has broken the final bonds between the states, and now the South begins lashing out at the hypocrisy of the Northern statesmen who they depended upon so much to help bring the nation together, to help possibly keep it all together. But no, it doesn't. The Richmond Inquirer is mentioning in a horrible headline about the hypocrisy of Northern statesmen. It says the plaintive whinings of Millard Fillmore, Lewis Cass, James Buchanan, Benjamin Butler, Stephen Douglas, and Franklin Pierce is just not going to save the day. It says these facts carry on their face their own commentary. They clearly demonstrate that these Northern allies upon whom we chiefly relied are as false as hell, and that our only safety is the erection of a wall between us, the South, and them, the North, as high as heaven. It's all over in May of 1861. Franklin Pierce and his allies, however supportive they were, are not going to help. There's one more note. This appears in an Alabama newspaper by the end of the month. It's another rumor. It says, it is reported by Telegraph that ex-President Pierce is tired of the war brought on by the Lincoln cabinet and is in favor of a peaceable separation. When the war furor seized the Northern mind after the fall of Sumter, Mr. Pierce went with the multitude and warmly insisted upon upholding the flag and maintaining the Union. We are glad to learn that this war fever has burned itself out so rapidly. End quote. So there's that final hope that Franklin Pierce, the man who everyone had hoped for just a moment, for 15 minutes in late 1860 and early 1861, would somehow save the day, is now being looked on as a champion who can help separate the North and the South forever. Of course, Franklin Pierce and those other statesmen are not going to save the day. We've got 4 bloody, horrible years of war in front of us. So there you have it. The story of Franklin Pierce and that cameo in the late weeks, the waning weeks of 1860 into early 1861. Thanks for listening. See you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.